everybody. I'm Dr. Rachel Rubin, and you are here for another episode of Sex Matters. And I am so thrilled to introduce two of my major mentors, actually. I can't say enough wonderful things about these two human beings. Actually, what I know about advocacy and education has really come from these two men, as well as a few other people. And they did something really big last week, and they're so kind to join me to talk about it. So we went to the FDA earlier this summer to advocate for hormone therapy products, to talk about hormone therapy products in women. And then the men were invited, not just men, but the men were invited to talk about men's health and testosterone therapy just last week at the FDA. So we're so excited that advocacy is working because the FDA has asked for the labeling to be changed on estrogen products. And now we're asking for more things when it comes to testosterone products. So I'm going to start with Dr. Mohit Khera. Why don't you introduce yourself? And then we'll introduce Dr. Abraham Morgentaler.
Hi, I'm Mohit Khera, Professor of Urology, Baylor College of Medicine. Thank you, Rachel, for having me on.
And Dr. Morgentaler, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Abe Morgentaler. I am the Blavatnik Faculty Fellow in Health and Longevity at Harvard Medical School. Basically, I'm a simple country urologist.
All right, Dr. Khera, get close to your microphone and tell everybody what you all did at the FDA this week, which was so revolutionary. And everybody, we will link to the whole meeting because I learned a ton watching.
So on December 10th of this year, we had an incredible meeting with the FDA. We're very grateful for Admiral Dr. Brian Christine, Dr. McCary for hosting us on this really important and timely discussion on TRT in men's health. It was an expert panel. We had the opportunity, there was 13 speakers, to talk about different issues in testosterone replacement therapy, the efficacy, the safety, and quite frankly, some of the changes that need to occur within the label. Some of the topics that were brought up were changes in the indications for use. Currently, as you know, the indications for use are basically patients who have a certain medical condition, like a pituitary tumor, and we know that 85% of the patients we treat are not on label. Talking about changing the levels. Currently, we use 300 nanogram per deciliter, and 350 seems to be more appropriate. And also talking about other topics such as removing prostate cancer from the label, which Dr. Morgentaler will talk about. And then finally, descheduling. You know that testosterone is the only hormone and its derivatives that are considered controlled substances, which doesn't make any sense.
Can you explain to the audience why testosterone? I thought the stories that were told on this panel were so interesting of how we got that DEA requirement on it.
Yeah, this was in the early 1980s, I believe. Landon Trost gave an excellent talk on that. And essentially, this was not based on any clinical evidence. It wasn't evidence-based. Essentially, they decided to make it, thought that if they put it as a controlled substance, you would reduce the use of testosterone, particularly in younger men. Dr. Trost showed 8th graders, 10th graders, 12th graders. And what he showed was that actually it did not significantly reduce the utilization of testosterone within that population, actually continued to go up. So what they've had in place was ineffective. And now we've been stuck with this as a controlled substance for all these years.
And it is such a barrier. It's a barrier for telemedicine. It is a barrier for even for on the women's side. So you said something very important here, I think, for our primary care listeners, is that most of the testosterone that we prescribe as urologists or primary care is off-label testosterone for men for age-related hypogonadism. And that is not an FDA indication at the current moment. And similar, we give testosterone for women for low desire, bothersome low desire, and it's a controlled substance, and it's also off-label. And so this is really important because that controlled substance really affects all people, I would say.
Yeah, but think about it, Rachel. We give patients HCG, that raises testosterone. We give Clomid, that raises testosterone. We use other medications that raise testosterone, and those are not considered controlled substances, but they're doing the exact same thing. They're raising testosterone.
It makes no sense. And so even with so you said it's not evidence-based. And so people think that because it's there, it must be dangerous. There must be a good reason for it. Just like the labels for estrogen saying stroke, heart attacks, blood clot, dementia, and we know that's not true. We know that was not evidence-based either. And so it really does require the community to step up and say, wait a minute, show me the evidence that this makes sense. And they can't find any, right? It does not exist.
You're right. Everything that we mentioned today is called barriers to treatment. Treating as a controlled substance, making it off-label for use. The levels. I mean, all of these are barriers. And what you're doing is you're denying people access to care when they would benefit from this treatment.
So I want to go to Dr. Morgentaler because you are the pioneer that single-handedly changed the entire urologic community to make them realize that testosterone does not cause or fuel or worsen prostate cancer. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that because the primary care docs listening, they haven't necessarily gotten that message and they don't want to cause harm, right? They truly don't want to cause harm. So talk a little bit about your story and what you said to the FDA just last week.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you for having me on. This was a remarkable event for testosterone. I know that you and some of your colleagues were at the FDA around women and hormones, but, I've been working with testosterone since the late 1980s, and to the best of my knowledge, the FDA has never invited experts to come and so that they could listen to what clinicians actually had to say. And it's very important because the label, a lot of doctors, we don't really have a centralized one place, ultimate authority in medicine, right? So we have guidelines, we have our societies that tell us what to do. There's clinical practice, but the FDA kind of stands alone. It's supposed to be a neutral arbiter, if you will, of true risks and any indications. And so a lot of the primary care doctors that may be watching this show right now look to the label for different products to find out what's legit and what's not. And so the FDA has had some label stuff around testosterone that, in my mind, is just totally inappropriate. One is that it's a scheduled substance, just like narcotics and opiates and benzodiazepines. And the other is that this restriction on age-related testosterone deficiency. Like that's, I'm going to use a word that's not very medically politic, but it's nuts, right? So that all it means if you've got age-related anything is that the prevalence goes up with age. Well, that's true for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, even most adult cancers. It doesn't say anything that it's age-related. It just means we don't know what caused it. But we treat hypertension, coronary artery disease, because they affect people's health, and we can improve their health. The prostate cancer thing is something I've been working on since I started, because when I started working with testosterone was basically prohibited worldwide. There was the belief that testosterone caused and promoted prostate cancer, so much so, and I said this at the meeting, in my training in the 1980s, we were taught that if a man received a testosterone injection today, healthy man, he would come back in 1 month with aggressive prostate cancer. I mean, it's nuts to think about this today, but that's what we were taught. And because testosterone wasn't used back then, there was no clinician who could say, now, hold on a second, I've got 50 or 100 or 200 patients on it. That's not true. So it turns out that it was based on Charles Huggins, who in 1941, together with his co-author, Clarence Hodges, they took some men, a small number of men who had metastatic prostate cancer, and they showed, to their credit, for the first time, that removing the testicles, castration, which lowers testosterone, was beneficial for these men. But they also wrote that in every single case in which they gave testosterone injections, the biomarker they were looking at, which was acid phosphatase, rose, and they said that's bad. And the final sentence in their landmark paper was testosterone injections activate prostate cancer. Well, it turns out that Huggins and Hodges only treated one guy with testosterone who wasn't already castrated. And his numbers are all over the place. It's a one-patient conclusion. And they only treated him for 18 days. So it's based on nothing, but everybody bought it. They bought it, and it's still present today in some form that we're afraid of this. I've reviewed the literature many times, and truth is we have no data. We have none that supports that concept. None. And so what I said at the meeting is that the scientific validity of the belief that testosterone is dangerous for the prostate is as great as the scientific basis for the tooth fairy.
And it was very telling because my daughter did, the day you said that, my daughter lost a tooth, and I laughed to myself because I had to be the tooth fairy that night. And so it's true, right? You have done, your entire career has been to explain to people that it wasn't true, that the data did not support it. But to change people's hearts and minds, it takes decades. And that's what we're dealing with for really hormone therapy for everybody, right? Whether it's estrogen or testosterone. And so what's so interesting is there was some other data that came out around 2015, and the FDA very quickly put an advisory board together and put a box labeling on testosterone therapy, which they did not do an advisory panel when it came to putting the box on estrogen. And it was during that advisory panel that said, we're going to put the box labeling on, but here's the study you have to do. And out came the Traverse trial, which Dr. Khera was instrumental in doing this trial. And all the primary care docs listening, they're worried about prostate cancer and they're worried about cardiovascular disease. And they are saying testosterone is not safe for my patient. So Dr. Khera, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Traverse trial? And I know you and I have done a Medscape video fully on the Traverse trial, so we will link to that as well. But what did you tell the FDA, and what can you tell primary care docs today?
Sure. So, from 2010 to 2014, there were 4 studies suggesting that testosterone may increase the risk of cardiovascular events. Prior to that, over 200 studies suggesting that not only does it not increase the risk of cardiovascular events, it may decrease the risk of cardiovascular events. But in either case, the FDA had some concerns. In 2015, they wanted and gave guidance on the Traverse trial. The Traverse trial had its first patient enrolled in 2018, 5,246 patients randomized to testosterone or placebo. It was a 6-year event that we worked on this project. And essentially, the first publication came out in 2023. And what did we find? Testosterone did not increase the risk of heart attack. Testosterone did not increase the risk of prostate cancer. Testosterone did not increase the risk of BPH. In fact, we did find that testosterone actually had benefits, including libido and depression. So again, this concern that testosterone increases cardiovascular events, I think, has been put to rest. And fortunately, February 28th of this year, the FDA removed the label warning that testosterone increases cardiovascular risk. So again, that's a big win for us based on the Traverse trial.
And as we've seen, it's not enough to just remove the label. We have to teach people that it happened and how to do this. And I know the 3 of us teach loudly. Every year we do a Harvard conference together teaching about testosterone. And we need more. We need as many people learning about this as possible, because the primary care docs, they are getting all these patients coming to them asking questions, or they are, feeling tired. They're having low energy. They feel like they can't do as much. Their sexual health is worse. And so one thing that came up at the FDA, and then I'll let everybody go, is this idea of that we should be screening patients for testosterone. My friend Dr. Helen Burney gave a lovely talk about this. Dr. Morgentaler, what do you think about that idea, the idea of screening men for testosterone deficiency in the primary care setting?
I think it's a great idea, but there's a step that has to happen first, Rachel. And what has to happen first is, before we even screen, is we have to get past what I called at the FDA meeting the smug dismissal of men who have testosterone deficiency. They're already identified, and a lot of the primary care doctors don't know or aren't interested in treating these men. So they may say, and all of us here on this panel, we see people who've gone to 1, 2, 3 other physicians before they come to us or to our colleagues who are involved in sexual medicine, and they've been told, yeah, you have it, or no, you don't have it, but either way, nobody wants to treat these guys. So listen, I think screening is a great idea. I think testosterone level in a man is the single best indicator of his health status. It has to do with so many things. It's a predictor of obesity, subsequent diabetes, metabolic syndrome, fertility, bone health, anemia. I mean, it's an amazing molecule, amazing what you learn if a testosterone level is low. But first, we have to get the primary care doctors to move off the block, right? This idea that we don't have enough evidence. Sorry, folks. If you really believe you're an evidence-based doctor, these studies are published in the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Lancet, the top journals in large randomized control trials. We have superb data showing that the men who have testosterone deficiency are suffering and that they get benefits with testosterone therapy.
Okay, I said that was the last question, but I do have one more because I'm learning today. And I will tell you, I think a lot of this is marketing. We are taking a topic, whether it's estrogen or testosterone. For some reason, people have emotions when it comes to sex hormones. They're not a feeling, my friends. They are a hormone like anything else. And so we are taking something that people have this very negative, very snake oily, very bodybuildery or longevity sort of connotations, and we're having to change people's minds. And that is much harder than teaching somebody something new. And so I joke we should call estrogen and testosterone a peptide and give it a new number or something like that and just tell them it's a different substance. But what do you make of this interest in GLP-1 therapy, which is revolutionizing and changing the face of medicine rapidly, Dr. Khera? I know you've done some research on this, because I personally see, and we're starting to see emerging data, that it turns out that GLPs are great, but GLPs plus for fixing someone who is hormone deficient, whether it's in menopause or testosterone deficient, is probably more of a home run. So I know you're actively working on this research as well. What can you tell the primary care doc who is excited about writing that GLP-1 prescription, but never checks a testosterone or thinks about menopause?
Yeah, so look, there are very few drugs in our history that have made drastic changes, and testosterone being one, but GLP-1 is another. It's made a huge impact on people's quality of lives. But with that is a cost. And the cost is that when you take a GLP-1, you can see about a 30% reduction in muscle mass. And sarcopenia, breaking a bone, is a real deal, particularly in older patients. But there's emerging data that suggests that if you take testosterone in hypogonadal men, you give them testosterone and you raise their T, you're less likely to see that muscle mass loss because testosterone is anabolic, right? And there are new drugs on the pipeline, you should be aware of that are coming out looking at combination testosterone GLP-1s, right? Strictly to address this concern.
And we're seeing the same as when it comes to the menopause hormone therapy data as well, is you really want to fill that gas tank, right? Before, yes, the GLP-1 is great, but if the gas tank is empty from a hormone perspective, you may not get as much of a success as you would want to. And we're really hoping, this is why I do these videos, because someone's listening and we're going to see a whole lot more research explode. So I am so grateful for anyone who doesn't know these two brilliant men. Follow everything they do. They have changed the course of medicine. They have taught me more than I could ever explain on a short video. Thank you all. I hope the FDA is listening, because these panels at really listening to the clinicians, the people who are on the ground doing the research studies, seeing the patients every single day, these stories matter. Sexual health matters. It all really matters. And we hope that you learned something today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.